Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to the New York City Council hearing on the Committee on Rules, Privileges, Elections, Standards, and Ethics. At this time, please silence all electronics and do not approach the dais. Thank you for your cooperation. Chair, you may begin.
Good morning and welcome to this meeting on the Committee of Rules, Privileges, Elections, Standards, and Ethics. I'm Councilmember Sandra Owen, Chair of the committee. Before we begin, I would like to recognize the other members of the committee who are present. Councilmember Akana Sion and Deputy Speaker Natasha Williams and Majority Leader Sean Brewer. I would also like to acknowledge the council to the committee, Jeff Campania, and the committee staff that worked on matters before the committee today. Director of Public Integrity, Francesca Della Vecchia, Deputy Director of Public Integrity, Alicia Vassell, and Chief Ethics Counsel, Pearl Moore. Today, we're holding a public hearing on the mayor's nominee to be the new commissioner of the Department of Investigations. By the letter dated March 13, 2026, and pursuant to Section 31 of the New York City Charter, Mayor Zoran Madani requested the council's advice and consent regarding his nomination of Nadia Shihara to be the commissioner of the Department of Investigations. Section 801 of the Charter provides that the DOI commissioner must be a member of the Bar of the State of New York in good standing and have a minimum of 5 years of law enforcement experience. The mayor may remove the commissioner for cause after notice and an opportunity to be heard. The Commissioner of DOI is responsible for investigating and referring for prosecution of cases of fraud, corruption, and other criminal activities by city employees, contractors, and others who do business with the city. In addition, DOI is charged with studying the city agency procedures to identify systematic failures and recommend improvements, investigating backgrounds of future city employees selected for sensitive positions, conducting background checks on company-awarded city contracts, and serving as the investigative unit of the Conflict of Interest Board. DOI must maintain a complaint bureau, which receives complaints from the public. The commissioner is authorized and empowered to conduct any study or investigation that, in the commissioner's opinion, may be in the best interest of the city. These include, but not limited to, investigations concerning the affairs, functions, accounts, methods, personnel, or efficiency of any agency over which DOI has jurisdiction. The commissioner must also conduct its investigations directed by the mayor or the council. In addition, COIB may direct the DOI to conduct investigations on matters relating to COIB's responsibilities under Charter Chapter 68. DOI has jurisdiction over any agency, officer, or employees of the city, any person or entity doing business in the city, and any person or entity paid with or receiving city funds. DOI has the right to compel the production of documents and testimony of witnesses. The commissioner is also responsible for approving the appointment of all New York City agencies' inspector general, all of whom report directly to the commissioner. In addition, Section 803 of the Charter requires that the DOI commissioner to report the name and the qualifications of the inspector general of the New York Police Department to the council. Pursuant to Executive Order 87-2, the commissioner sets guidelines regulating the submissions of annual employee financial disclosures. These disclosures must be reported to the DOI. These guidelines establish the deadlines for the submissions of these disclosures to ensure compliance within a reasonable time. The commissioner must prepare a written report or a statement of findings concerning the completed investigations and forward a copy to any requesting party. If the investigation involves allegations of criminal conduct, the commissioner, upon completing the investigation, must forward a copy of the written report or statement or findings to the appropriate prosecuting attorney. If the matter investigated concerns a conflict of interest or unethical conduct allegation, the commissioner must forward a copy of the written report or statement of findings to COIB. The commissioner also has a duty to forward to the council and to the mayor a copy of all reports and standards prepared by the Corruption Prevention and Management Review Bureau upon its issuance. We are joined today by Ms. Shihara. Ms. Shihara's law enforcement experience includes 11 years spent in the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of New York. She started as an assistant U.S. attorney in 2011. From 2018 to 2019, she served as the Deputy Chief of Public Integrity Section, in which role she supervised public corruption investigations, and prosecutions involving bribery, fraud, theft of government funds, money laundering, and drug trafficking. For 2019 to September 2022, she was the chief of the Organized Crime and Gang Section, in which she led investigation and prosecution of members of various organized crime groups. Most notably, she led the investigation and prosecution of rapper R. Kelly, which resulted in his conviction in charges of racketeering and sex trafficking. Ms. Shihara also worked for almost 3 years in the National Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, where she served as the appeals counsel in the Office of the Prosecutor. Most recently, from 2022 to September 2025, Ms. Shihara was a founding partner in the firm Shihara and Geddes, a firm that specializes in sexual misconduct cases, internal investigations, and criminal defense work. Ms. Shihara holds a Juris Doctorate degree from the University of Michigan and an LLM from the New York University School of Law. I'll now recognize the committee counsel to administer the affirmation.
Please raise your right hand. Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in your testimony before this committee and in answer to all council member questions? Thank you.
Mrs. Park. Good morning, Ms. Shihara. I now recognize you to make an opening statement.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Ung, Deputy Speaker Williams, and members of the committee. My name is Nadia Shahata. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today as the Council considers my nomination to serve as Commissioner of the Department of Investigation. DOI serves as the city's independent Inspector General with a critical dual mission: to root out corruption, waste, abuse, and other misconduct in city government, and also to help prevent such misconduct and waste from occurring in the first place. Its broad jurisdiction covers not only city agencies, employees, and elected officials, but also contractors, nonprofits, and other recipients of city funds. DOI thus plays a critical role in protecting public resources, ensuring the effective delivery of city services, and strengthening New Yorkers' trust in their government. I am honored to have been nominated to lead this important department, and if confirmed, I will take on this role with a deep respect for DOI's mandate and a clear commitment to independence, fairness, and transparency. I also intend to work constructively with the City Council. Like DOI, the Council serves an important oversight function, and there are meaningful opportunities for the work of DOI and the Council to inform and complement one another, whether through the Council uncovering areas that warrant further investigation by DOI, or DOI's findings shining a light on areas where further Council oversight may be useful or new legislation may be warranted. If confirmed, I will ensure an open dialogue between DOI and the Council. Before discussing further how I would approach the role of DOI Commissioner, I'd like to tell you a bit about myself and my qualifications for this position. I'm an immigrant to this country and a naturalized citizen. Born abroad to Egyptian parents, I moved here at the age of 5 and grew up in Washington, D.C. I proudly became a U.S. citizen while in college, a decision that has allowed me to pursue a fulfilling career engaged mostly in public service. I attended the University of Michigan Law School, where I served as editor-in-chief of the Michigan Law Review. After law school, I clerked for a federal judge and worked as a litigation associate at large law firms in Washington, D.C. and New York. I later pursued an LLM in International Legal Studies at NYU, and then moved to The Hague, where I worked as a war crimes prosecutor at the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. In 2011, I returned to New York to join the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of New York in Brooklyn, where I had the privilege of serving as an Assistant United States Attorney for over 11 years. I served in the general crimes, organized crime and gangs, and public integrity sections, and held senior leadership roles in the office, including as chief of the organized crime and gangs section and deputy chief of the public integrity section. In these roles, I regularly made decisions about how to deploy limited resources for maximum impact and worked closely with federal, state, and local law enforcement partners to conduct thorough, evidence-driven investigations. Over the course of my career as a prosecutor, I conducted and supervised complex investigations involving civil rights violations, public corruption, fraud, racketeering, and violent crime, including murder. Many of these cases involved holding powerful individuals accountable, often for committing crimes against the most vulnerable among us. For example, I led the investigation of federal correctional officers, including 2 lieutenants, for sexual abuse of female inmates at the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn. I prosecuted singer R. Kelly in a groundbreaking case where we used the racketeering statute to hold him accountable for decades of abuse of girls and young women throughout the country. I also prosecuted an active duty NYPD officer for his involvement in a violent extortion scheme targeting small business owners in an immigrant community in Astoria. My work as a federal prosecutor required independence, discretion, and the ability to follow the facts wherever they led, without fear or favor, whether that resulted in criminal charges or closing an investigation when the evidence did not support seeking an indictment. Throughout, my North Star was, and will continue to be, making independent decisions based on the facts and the law. In 2022, I left government to co-found a small law firm focused on civil rights and sexual misconduct matters, internal investigations, and criminal defense. That work deepened my understanding of the importance of fair and due process, the need for strong reporting mechanisms, and for institutional accountability when those mechanisms fail or don't exist. I've since left the firm, but its work continues through my amazing and talented former partners. I look forward to returning to public service and believe my experience, skills, and unwavering commitment to the rule of law will serve me well as DOI Commissioner. If confirmed, I will focus on 3 fundamentals. First, preserving DOI's investigative independence. DOI's effectiveness depends on its ability to pursue investigations based on the evidence and the law, without fear or favor, no matter where that leads. That is how I approached investigations as a federal prosecutor, and that is how I will lead DOI. Second, ensuring that DOI has the resources and capacity to fulfill its critical mandate effectively. That means being a relentless advocate for DOI's funding, but also ensuring its limited resources are used wisely, focusing on areas where the risk of corruption is highest, public safety is endangered, or our most vulnerable communities are affected. It also means continuing to invest in DOI's workforce, recruiting, retaining, and developing talented investigators, attorneys, analysts, and other professionals, and fostering a welcoming, diverse workplace where people want to build their careers. Third, ensuring that DOI's impressive track record and work continues to lead to meaningful results. That includes pursuing individual accountability through investigations and referrals for prosecution, but it also means strengthening DOI's proactive work in identifying systemic risks, issuing practical and actionable recommendations for reform, and following up to ensure accepted recommendations are in fact implemented. In this regard, I intend to assess and enhance DOI's use of data analytics to detect patterns of risk, look at opportunities to augment training efforts, and explore whether there is room to leverage DOI's monitorship experience to include consideration of additional DOI-supervised monitorships for large-scale city projects to prevent fraud and waste in real time, as DOI has done with its asylum seeker monitorship. In closing, if confirmed, I look forward to serving with and learning from the dedicated public servants at DOI who advance its essential mission every day. I also look forward to working with this council, City Hall, and agencies across city government to help ensure that New York City can effectively meet the needs of its residents while operating with integrity, accountability, and fairness for all. Thank you again for the opportunity to appear before you today, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. And we've also been joined by Minority Leader David Carr and Councilmember Chris Banks. So to start, please describe why it's important for the Commissioner of the Department of Investigations to be independent of political officials that she or he is in charge of investigating.
Well, as I mentioned, DOI has an important mission to root out corruption and to help prevent it, and independence is key to that. Independence ensures the public that all investigations are driven by the facts, law, and evidence, and nothing else, and that they can have confidence in the findings that DOI makes. Independence also preserves integrity of the investigations, ensuring that the officials potentially being investigated are not controlling an investigation, and that's of supreme importance to the work DOI does.
Thank you. So what relationship should there be between the mayor and the commissioner of DOI? And what information should be disclosed to the mayor about the ongoing operations of DOI?
So I think investigatively, DOI should be acting independently, but that doesn't mean it must operate in complete isolation from City Hall or the City Council. I think particularly in the areas of prevention and proactive work, there is room for engagement with other branches of government, including the council and City Hall, and particularly in ensuring that policy recommendations that have been accepted are in fact implemented, and or understanding why they have not been implemented, if that's the case, and also looking at whether there are proactive monitorships or other ways that DOI can be engaged in prevention efforts. And then also in the area of ensuring that DOI has the resources it needs to conduct its important mission, I think it's appropriate for the commissioner to speak to the mayor's office and advocate for DOI's budget, particularly with OMB, to ensure it has the resources it needs.
Thank you. You have a very long career investigating public corruption. Based on that experience, does such investigation involve examining patterns of campaign donations?
Sorry, what was the last part of your question?
Based on that experience, does such investigation involve examining patterns of campaign donations?
Do I have experience involving patterns of campaign donations? Is that
In
the
your yes, in your career.
Sure. I have not myself investigated patterns of campaign donations. I think while I was deputy chief of the public integrity section, I believe there were investigations of, for example, the use of straw donors to campaigns, and that's certainly something I'm familiar with.
Okay, so even not in your career, like why, can you explain why political donations might be relevant in a public corruption investigation? You were just saying the straw
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah, there are rules about who can donate to campaigns and amounts that can be donated. And so it may be appropriate in certain investigations to look at that to ensure that, for example, foreign nationals aren't contributing to campaigns illegally, or there's not illegal bundling going on with respect to campaigns.
Have you ever donated to any candidates for federal office or to federal political action committees?
Yes, I have.
And how many times have you made such a donation?
I don't know the exact number, but I have donated throughout my life, as many people. I have engaged in the political process and donated to federal campaigns.
Have you ever donated to any candidates from the New York State office or political action committees that support New York State candidates?
To the best of my recollection, no, I have not.
Okay. Have you donated to any municipal political candidates other than the mayor, the current mayor?
No.
Okay. Have you donated to the political campaigns of anyone now employed by the city and over whom you would have jurisdiction as a commissioner of Department of Investigations?
Other than my donations to the mayor, no.
Okay, thank you. I now will recognize other members of the committee to ask questions. First, Deputy Speaker Williams.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
The past Mayor Eric Adams, DOI commissioner, didn't make any contributions to him, and the former commissioner, predecessor before that, didn't make any contributions to Mayor de Blasio. In your answers to our pre-hearing questions, you informed us that you donated to Mayor Mamdani's mayoral campaign 4 times for a total of $700. Under New York City's campaign finance laws, the amount was supplemented by an additional $2,000 in matching funds for a total impact of $2,700. In addition to donating money, what else did you do for his campaign?
So as you mentioned, I donated $700 over the course of 7 months, like many New Yorkers participating in the political process. And in addition, on one evening, I canvassed for his campaign for about an hour and a half.
Okay, was that the only time that you campaigned for him? It was just one time? Did you do any other type of canvassing, door knocking, street corners?
No, just that one time.
night? Okay. Have you ever done any canvassing for any other city officials?
No, I have not.
Did you attend any campaign events in support of his campaign?
No, I did not.
Would you agree, even though it was one night, I'll admit, that for busy professionals like yourself, it takes significantly more enthusiasm to get people to volunteer for a campaign than merely to donate money?
I would just note that this was after I had left my law firm, so I was not employed at the time.
Okay. I just, as an elected official myself, like, it's so easy to get someone to, like, donate a couple of dollars, but when it comes to actually having people physically, like, knock doors, I find that the people that have canvassed really, really are committed to what I'm doing versus, like, the people that donate money. So that's just the nature of the questions. So we've established that you donated repeatedly to the current mayor's campaign and you gave a little bit of your time and energy to volunteer for him. And we've also established that you have never donated to any other candidate for municipal office. Based on this pattern, might you say that you have demonstrated a uniquely enthusiastic level of support for this particular mayor?
I would not agree with that characterization. I've donated throughout my life to various political campaigns, but most importantly, as a former federal prosecutor, I understand very well the difference between my support for a campaign as a private citizen and my role as a public servant tasked with making independent investigative decisions based on the facts and the law without fear or favor. Throughout my over 20-year legal career, I have acted professionally and with independence and integrity, and I would continue to do that as DOI Commissioner.
Thank you. And yes, we did see that you donated to federal campaigns, but you never donated to city campaigns. And so what specifically excited you about the mayor's campaigns compared to other municipal races that for the first time you've decided to donate and volunteer, even though for one night, I'm trying to put it into perspective, for a campaign for city office?
This was a particularly important election, which seemed like its outcome was not foretold. And I, like many New Yorkers, I believe affordability is an issue in this city, and that's what drove me to give to the mayor's campaign and support his campaign.
Thank you. What would you say to someone who says these donations or sees these donations, your volunteering and your enthusiasm for his campaign, if they say that this is evidence that you have a pre-existing bias in favor of this mayor? And obviously in the council, especially in these positions, we're always looking for independent individuals that don't necessarily have predetermined relationships with the mayor. So would you say that this is evidence that you have a pre-existing bias for the mayor?
Absolutely not. I think
Okay.
anyone who knows me or who has worked with me knows my level of professionalism and integrity over my 20-year career, and that I will approach every investigation, including any that may involve the mayor or any senior officials in his administration. I will approach that as I would approach any investigation, looking at the facts and the law and following those with independence and objectivity.
Thank you. So if you were confirmed as commissioner, do you think it would be appropriate to, let's say, donate to the mayor's reelection campaign?
I don't plan to make any donations as commissioner.
Okay. Yeah, you mentioned independence a lot. And, similar question again, as commissioner, just wondering your opinion if you feel like municipal campaigns give the appearance that you favor some electeds more than others. And do you think that this could potentially interfere with the appearance of independence?
I think if I'm confirmed, my record will be judged by what I do, and I intend to lead the department in the way I have always conducted myself as a federal prosecutor and throughout my legal career, with independence and integrity. It is incredibly important that investigators and law enforcement and prosecutors follow the facts wherever they lead. And that is what I've always done, and that is what I will continue to do if I'm confirmed as commissioner.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Now I'm going to turn it over to the Majority Leader Abreu.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for testifying before us, Ms. Shihata. How and when did you come to meet the Mayor's Chief Counsel, Ramsey Kassem?
I first met him shortly after I graduated from law school. I was studying for the bar exam in Washington, D.C. I was introduced to him by a mutual friend. I believe he was a summer associate at a large law firm in D.C. and didn't know many people in that city, and so that's how I first met him.
Have you ever had dinner with him or met him for drinks after work?
I believe that summer we met for drinks and dinner, yes.
In responses to our pre-hearing questions, you described your relationship with Mr. Kassem as a social relationship that started shortly after graduating from law school. How many years ago was that?
I graduated from law school in 2003.
What involvement has Mr. Kassem had in your career, and what role did he play when you founded your law firm in 2022?
He has not played a role in my career. We have kept in touch over the years, seeing each other every few years periodically. When I started my law firm with my partner, one of the areas we intended to focus on was civil rights work, and I reached out to him and we met for lunch. I reached out to him to catch up and to get his advice because he had done a lot of civil rights work and was a leader in that area.
DOI has conducted major investigations of the last two mayors and their staffs. If DOI investigates Mayor Mamdani or his staff, do you acknowledge that the chief counsel to the mayor will likely be involved in their defense?
Do I acknowledge that he would likely be involved? I acknowledge that's a possibility.
And why a possibility and not just a fact, not just a matter of fact?
I don't know exactly how their office operates.
Do you acknowledge that given the close working relationship of the mayor and his chief counsel, there may be instances when the chief counsel's role is also investigated?
Yes, that is a possibility, yes.
Given your long-standing social relationship with the mayor's chief's counsel, Mr. Kassem, would you recuse yourself from any of those investigations? When you answer, please explain your reasoning.
Sure. I would consult with counsel and the general counsel of DOI regarding any such instances, and I would follow whatever recusal advice I was given.
So not necessarily you won't necessarily recuse yourself from those investigations. Is that right?
Sitting here today, I can't anticipate every possible scenario that might come up, but what I can commit to is consulting with counsel and following any recusal advice I'm given.
If at any moment the DOI, my apologies, if at any moment the chief counsel were ever to be investigated, would you recuse yourself from that?
As I said, I would consult with counsel. I think in those circumstances that's likely, but what I would do is consult with general counsel and follow that advice.
The mayor's transition team consisted of 400 people who were brought together to recruit talent to the administration. Did you have any direct involvement with the members of the transition team during the selection process, or do you only deal with staff?
During the selection process, sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, of course. Did you have any direct involvement with the members of the transition team during the selection process, or did you only deal with staff?
I dealt with staff. I think at one point after I had submitted my application for the position, I received a call from someone on the transition team just to acknowledge receipt of the application materials, and they asked me one or two questions.
But your first contact was with staff, is that correct?
Correct.
Did your relationship with the council to the mayor allow you to bypass the members of the transition team during the selection process? My understanding is yes.
I don't know what the procedures are with the transition team, so I'm not in a position to answer that.
Okay. You said in your pre-hearing questions that the mayor's council asked you to apply for the job, that it wasn't your idea. If you were looking to hire people for their independence, will you hire someone with whom you've been friends for almost half your life, or will you try to conduct outreach beyond your immediate circle?
So I think that mischaracterizes what transpired.
Okay.
The chief counsel contacted me to see if I might be interested in the position based on, I believe he contacted me based on my skill and experience for the job. He didn't encourage me to apply. He didn't ask me to apply. He asked me if I was interested. I considered whether I was, and then I submitted an application.
Were you interested before that request came in?
Before he contacted me, I did see in the news that the previous DOI commissioner had left her position, and I had thought about it briefly.
And why didn't you apply before that?
That was a few days before he reached out to me.
Has Mr. Kassem or anyone else working for the mayor suggested that there are individuals that they would recommend for employment at DOI? If not, do you think it would be appropriate for them to make such recommendations?
They have not, and I intend to make independent decisions about who is employed at DOI.
Why did you decide to leave the U.S. Attorney's Office?
I had been at the U.S. Attorney's Office for about 11 and a half years. I had conducted and supervised countless investigations, prosecutions, and appeals. I felt like I had reached my potential at that job, and it was also time to let other people have leadership opportunities there. Another colleague of mine had decided to leave before me. We had started to talk about potentially opening up a small law firm. That prospect was interesting to me at the time, and I decided I wanted to pursue that.
You reported that you left your law firm in September of 2025. Your former partner reported that in August of 2025, the firm owned one or more clients involved in the Braggs matter, the BHRAGS matter that is currently before the DOI. Who are these clients, and in what capacity are these clients involved in the matter? Are they targets?
So I was not aware of that involvement, but my understanding, which I learned just a few days ago after the indictment became public, is that the firm or a partner in the firm is pool counsel to employees employed by one of the nonprofits.
Do you intend to discuss these matters with COIB or DOI during your vetting process?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Have you discussed these matters with COIB or DOI during your vetting process?
I have not. I was not aware of the representation until 2 days ago.
And if confirmed, what would you do in relation to these matters?
Again, I would seek the advice of counsel and follow any recusal advice.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I would turn it over to Minority Leader Carr.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Shahada, thank you for being with us today and answering all of our questions and for your testimony. I want to talk a little bit about your time in public service and then in the private sector. So obviously you have significant public service experience coming into this appointment process. And you talked a little bit about this in your pre-hearing question responses. Why return to public service now when it seems like you could really go anywhere that you like based on your resume, and why in particular DOI?
So I've always felt most fulfilled in my career when engaged in public service. I think public service is where you can really have the most impact, and I think the work that DOI does is so important to the city in rooting out corruption, waste, and mismanagement, and also helping to prevent those things, that it's really a unique opportunity to make a difference in a city that I love, and so that's why.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned in your response to the Deputy Speaker's questions that you only donated to one non-federal candidate, and that's the mayor, correct?
That's right.
And your contributions to federal candidates over the years, were they to candidates of a single party or were they multiple parties?
I believe they were candidates of a single party.
And would you identify which party that was?
The Democratic Party. I will say I have voted in the past for other parties.
Okay, that's good to know. So you used this phrase earlier in your testimony and then in answer to questions, without fear or favor, right? And that's often used, particularly for folks who are in or seeking law enforcement careers. And so you'd be returning to a law enforcement role if you were confirmed. Would you commit to acting without fear or favor, regardless of the political persuasion or identity of the people you were investigating?
Absolutely.
And can you talk a little bit about how important you feel that is in terms of your role, despite coming to the table with views?
I think it's the most important thing. Investigations have to be driven by the evidence, the law, and nothing else. They must be apolitical, nonpartisan. That's how you ensure you're reaching outcomes that are warranted. And it's also how you build trust in your decision-making by the public.
So you indicated earlier, right, you contributed to the mayor, you volunteered a little bit of time for the mayor. Clearly you have a level of investment in his success as the mayor that perhaps some others do not, and support for him and his views in at least one particular policy area. You talked about affordability in your answers. So how do you compartmentalize that political kinship, if you will, with a role that may have you investigating that very leader and his administration, depending upon the circumstances?
It's what I have done throughout my career, particularly as a federal prosecutor. I've investigated people I have supported in the past. That has not affected my ability to investigate them and reach conclusions driven by the evidence and the law. And that is how I will continue to conduct myself as DOI Commissioner.
Appreciate that. My understanding is that you have at least one, if not multiple, social media accounts that you're the owner or user for. Is that correct?
Yes.
What platforms?
I believe I have a Facebook account, an X account, Instagram, Threads, and Substack, I believe.
Okay, so pretty comprehensive list there. Are they available to view by the public?
Oh, and sorry, LinkedIn as well.
LinkedIn, okay.
My LinkedIn is public, yes.
But the others are not.
I don't believe so.
Have they ever been available to the public, to your knowledge?
I think at one point my X account was.
And when did you make that change, to the best of your recollection?
When I had a active law firm.
Okay. And would you be willing to make those accounts accessible to the public so they could be reviewed by the public as you go through this vetting process and, of course, the council institutionally?
Well, I would say I would be willing to consider it. My social media accounts have a lot of personal family photos and things like that I would not necessarily want to share with the broad public.
And what about members of the council who are assisting the committee with this investigatory and vetting process for your nomination?
I'm happy to consider it.
Okay. And in terms of, the resources that you'd be looking for the Department of Investigation, you indicated in your testimony that you'd broadly be advocating for agency, whatever the agency needed in terms of staffing. Do you have a sense of what that is?
So I watched the preliminary budget hearing involving the Oversight Committee and the acting commissioner's testimony there. So from that testimony, I'm aware of some of the specifics of the budgetary issues.
So you'd be digging into that more, I guess, if in the event that you were confirmed at that point?
Yes, absolutely.
And do you have a sense of what you'd be doing as we approach the executive budget proposal later in the spring, once you had gotten your feet wet, if you were confirmed?
Yes, I imagine I would be advocating for additional resources for DOI.
Okay. That's all the questions I have. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We've also been joined by Councilmember Rowley. Now I'd like to turn it over to Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, and apologies for coming late. I was stuck in a meeting, but thanks for being here today.
Thank you.
And I know that these questions that I'm about to ask are similar in vein to some of the sentiments of the other previous questions. So my first question is, how can you assure members of the council that the public at large, that you will investigate the mayor and his staff without bias, given that you and the council to the mayor have maintained a social relationship for almost half your life, and that Mr. Kassem is also the person who recruited you to apply for the job?
Well, first, just to clarify,
Yeah.
I have been friends with Mr. Kassem for a long time, but I would just like to make clear that it was not a close friendship. It has not been a close friendship. We have seen each other periodically once every few years, maybe exchanged a few emails once every few years, so I would not characterize it as a particularly close relationship.
Okay, I overheard you saying that as I was walking in, so I just wanted
Sure.
to double check. Okay.
But more fundamentally, I intend, if confirmed, to approach being DOI commissioner as I have as I approach being a federal prosecutor, which is to investigate matters without fear or favor, following the evidence and the law and nothing else.
I actually underlined that in your testimony because I like fear or favor. That's a good notion. But one other thing, well, because in the previous, I guess the reason why we're asking this also is because it was actually the former DOI staff that broke the investigation around the previous administration and the previous mayor. So just want to make sure, obviously, that, you know, when it comes to your role, especially in this particular role, that you will be able to do it without any sort of bias or, you know, skewed perspective. So just wanted to make sure about that.
And just to add,
Yeah.
I think the work that the prior commissioner did and that DOI did under the prior commissioner was very important, and I intend to try to follow in her big footsteps should I be confirmed.
Okay. If you were investigating public contracts that were supposed to be subject to an RFP and you found that a contract had been awarded to the friend of the official in charge of the contract, would you stop your inquiry if you found out that the contractor was qualified to provide the services?
No, I think that would still be a matter that should be investigated.
Okay. In 2025, it was reported that since 2019, DOI has lost a quarter of its employees. As commissioner, what will you do to increase and maintain the headcount necessary for the agency to do its job?
So I agree this is an important issue, and that the lessening of DOI's workforce is something that the DOI commissioner really needs to address. And so I would start by being a relentless advocate for DOI's budget and explaining why it's so important that DOI is properly funded. I think it ultimately leads to saving city resources, given DOI's mandate in rooting out corruption and waste. So I think I would start with advocating with the Office of Management and Budget and the Mayor's Office, but also expanding that as necessary to the City Council and the public at large so that New Yorkers understand what's at stake when DOI is not properly funded. I think I would also invest time and resources in ensuring that the headcount that DOI has remains there, including by ensuring that we don't have too much attrition, and that DOI is a place where people want to build their careers and stay.
What's the current headcount and how has that changed compared to previous fiscal years?
So my understanding is that the current headcount is around a little over 400.
Okay.
And I think that includes some individuals that are actually paid by other city agencies. My understanding is about 5 years ago that that DOI had a significantly higher headcount, that it was, I think, over 108 more positions.
Okay, over 108 more. Okay, because I know the current chair of our city council's oversight and investigation, as well as the previous chair, have both advocated for a lot more funding in order to have the staffing necessary to do your jobs effectively. And your predecessor actually testified in a budget hearing that the budgetary needs of the agency did not seem to be a priority for the previous mayor. And so just wondering if you've had any conversations with the current mayor about his commitment to funding the agency.
I have not, as there is an acting commissioner who is leading those efforts now. but I can assure the council that that will be a top priority of mine to have those conversations.
Okay, or even in your conversations with the acting commissioner, do you know if that's something that, generally speaking, the agency is trying to really advocate for?
My understanding is yes.
Okay. And also, what amount would you say would be an increase that's necessary to be able to do the work effectively in your agency? Whether it's additional staff, how many more additional staff lines, and how does that translate to the budget? If you could give us a sense.
So I want to temper this by the fact that I'm not, in fact, in
Right.
the position yet. But my understanding from watching the public testimony is that there are, I believe, 26 vacancies currently. And so I think we'd want the ability to actually fill those lines. And in addition, I believe there are some new needs that have been brought up by the current leadership of DOI, including for the investigation into the World Trade Center toxins that the council has mandated that DOI conduct.
Okay. And what experience do you have advocating for your own operating budget, and how will that experience inform how you will advocate for DOI's budget?
So as I mentioned in my written responses, I did not have a role in securing funding at the U.S. Attorney's Office, other than ensuring that forfeiture funds were sought in cases and that certain investigations were designated as OCDF investigations. So I've not had that experience previously, but I have been doing my best to get up to speed on how the city budgeting process works, and I intend to rely on the incredible staff at DOI who works on this process as well to inform my decision-making in that regard.
Okay, great. Hopefully you'll have a loud voice when it comes to advocating for that.
I intend to.
Yes. Okay, are you aware that the mayor's preliminary budget provides DOI with the same budget as it had last year? Even in the face of a budget deficit, do you think that's appropriate given the functions of DOI?
So I am aware of that. I think I will always advocate for more funding for DOI, given its important mandate. And I anticipate, if confirmed, I would do that, advocate for more funding.
Okay, great. And I guess just my last question, because obviously you have a lot of experience throughout your different roles as prosecutor, running a law firm yourself. And have there ever been moments where there was a difficult situation you were in or case you were dealing with where personally you felt very strongly one way, but obviously you need to advocate on behalf of your client? Or, if let's just say when you were a prosecutor, the higher ups want you to prosecute the case a certain way. And was there ever an instance where you felt personally like it was different, and how did you work that situation out, or how did you advocate?
Sure. Yes, I do think there were some instances of that when I was a prosecutor. And the way I handled that was to advocate internally for my position and explain why I thought we should proceed in the manner we should.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'd like to turn it over now to Councilmember Banks.
Thank you, Chair, and congratulations again on your nomination.
Thank you.
How did you hear about the opening of the DOI commissioner vacancy?
I believe I saw it in the news initially.
And have you had any conversations with the mayor or his team about the expectations of this role?
In the interview process, they, asked me questions about my vision for the agency and my qualifications. So, but it was all in the interview process.
And anything further was discussed that you would?
With respect to
What-
my expectations,
expectation,
that I would do a
yes.
certain thing, for example? No, absolutely not.
You were reportedly contacted by the mayor directly for this position, am I?
No, by his chief counsel.
By his chief counsel. And it is, for the record, you have contributed to the mayor's campaign.
Yes, like
Prior
many
to-
New Yorkers, I have.
Why should New Yorkers believe that you can independently act when it comes to being a DOI commissioner with these loose relationships with the administration or with the mayor?
Because that is what I have done throughout my career. I've acted with integrity and independence as a federal prosecutor. I've investigated people I've supported in the past. It has no bearing and will have no bearing on how I conduct myself in this position should I be confirmed.
Okay. And given your previous relationship with the mayor, would you commit on record to accusing yourself from any investigation that directly involves the mayor or any senior mayoral official?
I will commit to seeking the advice of counsel regarding recusal and following the advice I receive.
Do you believe that your prior financial support of the mayor creates a conflict of interest in this role? And if not, why not?
I do not actually.
Okay, and
believe
why
that,
not?
But because I have approached, it is within my very being to approach every investigation based on the evidence, facts, and the law, and nothing else. That is how I have conducted myself throughout my 20-year legal career, and that is how I will conduct myself here. Nevertheless, if any such situation arises, I will seek the advice of counsel, and I will follow any recusal advice I receive.
Thank you for that response. DOI is supposed to be independent and hold the city government accountable. Can you point to a time in your career where you've challenged leadership or authority despite political pressure? And this could include workplace-related political pressure.
So I think I mentioned that I led an investigation of sexual abuse of female inmates at the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn. As a federal prosecutor, we regularly interacted with law enforcement officers who worked at the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn as part of our other investigations and cases. They certainly were very interested in the investigation I was conducting and wanting it to finish quickly and to move forward as quickly as possible, and often sought information about the investigation. And I blocked all of that out and conducted the investigation, taking the time it needed to take to conduct and following the evidence and the law.
All right. If DOI uncovers a wrongdoing within the mayor's office, are you prepared to pursue that fully, even if it puts you at odds with the administration, the administration that appointed you?
Absolutely.
And we have seen high-profile corruption issues in government at multiple levels, including here in New York City. Why should the public trust that the DOI under your leadership will not be influenced by politics?
Again, because that is how I've conducted myself throughout my 20-year legal career. And DOI, the importance of independence and integrity of investigations at DOI is of the utmost importance to me. It is how I will lead DOI if confirmed. It is how DOI has operated with its amazing staff doing amazing work under difficult circumstances, and it is how I will continue to lead DOI.
Thank you. Just want to dive into some Nycc concerns and questions I have. And I do chair the Public Housing Committee. And during my time in office, Nycc has experienced repeated instances of corruption, including procurement irregularities, bribery schemes, and failures in internal oversight. Given your background in public integrity and complex corruption investigations, how would you approach the oversight of an agency as large and as complex as Nycc?
Thank you for the question. My understanding is that DOI currently has a squad dedicated to investigating issues at Nycc. And I certainly would continue to have a squad dedicated solely to that. I think one of my first orders of business after becoming commissioner, should I be confirmed, would be to assess the needs and capabilities of all the squads, including that one, and try to understand if there are additional resources they need, and if so, how we can get them what they need. So really, I think the first few months I'm at DOI will be about listening, learning, and then making informed decisions about how to improve things as necessary.
Thank you. Nycc is subject to federal oversight and ongoing monitorship. How would you ensure that the Department of Investigation asserts its authority and fulfills its mandate without duplicating federal efforts or deferring to heavily federal partners?
So I think open lines of communication are important, knowing what the federal monitor is looking into, because we don't want to duplicate efforts, particularly given the limited resources of the department. I also think certain things that the federal monitor looks into, which may be more systemic issues, can potentially inform investigations that DOI conducts. So if they find that there's a systemic issue with a certain area, there may be then room for a DOI investigation about individual misconduct in that area. And that's certainly a way that those two entities can inform one another.
And you've led investigations involving entrenched systems of abuse and corruption where misconduct was allowed to persist for years. What specific lessons from those experiences would you bring to DOI's oversight over Nycc?
I think one thing I've learned is that sometimes well-meaning policies can really result in systemic institutional failures. And so I think it's important to look at what the goal was,
No.
what the actual policy is, and then how that's been implemented. And you may start out with a great goal and still end up with a systemic failure. And so you have to look at each stage of the process.
Thank you. Many Nycc employees and residents report fear of retaliation from raising concerns. How would you ensure that DOI is viewed as safe and trusted venue for reporting this type of misconduct?
I think a lot of it is making the public aware, frankly, of DOI's existence. I'm not sure that the general public, including Nycc residents, necessarily know about DOI
Right.
or what it does. So I think there has to be outreach efforts to ensure that communities that have things to report are reached out to and know what DOI does, know that it's independent, and can feel comfortable, and then also know about the whistleblower protections available.
And according to a report by by Tim McNichols, complaints about Nycc submitted to the New York State Department of Investigation have steadily increased in recent years. Approximately 1,700 complaints in 2022, to about 2,500 in 2023, another 3,300 in 2024. Given the significant increase in Nycc's related complaints to DOI, how would you ensure that these reports lead to meaningful systemic change and improved conditions for residents rather than remaining limited to reactive investigations?
So I think I would focus on two areas in trying to address that, which is obviously a very concerning upward trend in complaints. I think first is making sure that policy recommendations that have already been made and accepted are in fact implemented. So I think follow-up is very, very important, and that's something I would prioritize. I also think that there should be some analysis of the types of complaints received and to see kind of what areas they fall in as a predictor of where DOI should be putting its resources. So, if there are complaints about a certain area, then that is an area that DOI should consider proactively investigating rather than waiting for, a particular individual complaint to come into DOI's complaint system to address it.
All right, and my last question. Last week, Leader Jeffries and Councilmember Mealy and I were in Brownsville to announce $1 million in funding for security cameras and infrastructure upgrades at 3 Nycc developments, including $250,000 for Carter G. Woodson houses, which is in my district. This is a development with a tragic history, where several years ago a handyman murdered 3 senior residents. Last year, I led the effort to restore, along with my colleagues, $7 million in funding for Nycc security guard program at about 55 Nycc developments after it was proposed for elimination in the city's budget. However, in 2025, an investigation report by online publication, the city found that security and fire guards at Nycc developments were frequently absent from their posts, and in some cases falsified timesheets, putting residents at risk. As the nominee of the DOI commissioner, how would you ensure stronger oversight and accountability of Nycc security contracts so that resources the city fights to preserve actual results in real on-the-ground safety for residents?
Yeah, so I think the city's reporting on those issues was actually based on a DOI investigation and findings made by DOI. So I think the good news is that DOI has already been focused on this area and issued recommendations. So what I would do as DOI commissioner is to ensure that the recommendations that have been accepted by Nycc are in fact being implemented and following up regularly on that.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we've also been joined by Councilmember Krishna, and I'll turn over the questions to him.
Thank you, Chair. Good to see you, Ms. Shahada, and thank you for your testimony today, too. I wanted to ask some questions in a few different areas and just to clarify a few things. So just taking a step back, you've testified on a number of different topics at this point, too. But what would you say would be your top priorities as commissioner to improve the functioning of the agency itself?
I think the top priority is ensuring that DOI has the resources and budget it needs to conduct its mission.
And I would agree with that, too. And I think that has been a major issue. One question I know Councilmember Lee asked a bit about the budget deficit now and the need to increase resources for DOI, which has been a big issue. Can you talk a bit more first just about where do you see there being a need for resources within DOI? What particular staffing, and how would that help with the investigations you have too?
Sure. I think one area where, based on my conversations with people at DOI, where there has been significant turnover has been with investigators. And so I think that's a particular area where I would focus on getting resources so that we could hire sufficient investigators and then retain them, ensuring there is a path for career development for those people. I think often why people leave jobs like that is because they have opportunities for greater compensation, not only in the private sector, but sometimes even within city government, and maybe don't see a path for career development. I know the prior commissioner worked on these issues and focused on them intensely, and I would intend to continue that.
And part of that issue, I think, is sort of looking at, again, the way in which DOI, as you might be aware of too, is reliant particularly on asset forfeiture from one case in particular, but could be other ones as well, which, as we saw in our budget hearings earlier this year too, end up funding a number of core new operations within the agency. And frankly, an agency like this should not be so dependent on asset forfeiture to continue funding new but still critical operations of the agency. How do you think about the role of asset forfeiture funds? How would you work to ensure that the agency has the resources it needs and is not depending on asset forfeiture, and in one case in particular, as the way to fund the agency?
So my understanding is that there are particular rules that govern how you can use asset forfeiture funds, and that as a general matter, they are supposed to supplement budgetary needs for the department, but not supplant them. I think it's very important that DOI ensures it's following any Department of Justice rules regarding asset forfeiture and any state rules regarding asset forfeiture, so as not to jeopardize the ability to continue receiving and using asset forfeiture. So I think that needs to be looked at very carefully. And I think, again, I plan to be a relentless advocate for DOI's budget and to ensure that the mayor's office, the city council, the public at large really understands what's at stake here when the department is not funded properly.
Do you think there's also a role, there's been more conversations across the country and similar investigative agencies across the country that are funded budgetarily by a percentage of the city budget to preserve its independence so it's not going up and down depending on the political or administrative whims or budget deficits. Are you open to, do you see a role in considering pegging DOI's funding to a percentage of the city budget as opposed to the budget, financial, or political whims of a given moment?
I think that is certainly one way to ensure DOI's independence and also the appearance of its independence. And I believe you're correct that other cities have followed that model. My understanding is that the prior DOI commissioner supported just such a proposal in the city charter revision process, and I'm certainly open to considering that.
Shifting gears, in December, DOI published a report that criticized the Conflict of Interest Board for allowing city attorneys to represent other clients without obtaining a formal written waiver that would result in the publication of a formal written opinion. It also, the report, criticized Conflict of Interest Board for not making redacted advisory opinions available to the public as required by law. COIB maintains that they have not done anything wrong. What remedy would you recommend when there's a disagreement between DOI and COIB about the interpretation of laws governing the Conflicts of Interest Board?
So DOI doesn't have the power to force agencies to implement or accept its determinations, but it can make them public, as DOI has done here. I think there also may be a role to play for the city's corporation council to weigh in on the issue and give a definitive opinion about it.
Now, another issue that's come up, and you've heard too, is the fact that the importance of the independence of this role, as I'm sure you know well and can agree to, and in particular, making sure that this role in the Department of Investigation, while the nomination comes from City Hall, that there is a clear wall of independence between DOI, City Hall, and frankly, every agency in city government. And you've heard a number of questions to this point already, really going to the fact that, I think all of us, and I'm in particular, think that the independence of this office is sacred. And, I think as with given your time as a federal prosecutor as well, the federal restrictions like the Hatch Act are very clear about ways in which to preserve the independence of federal prosecutors when it comes to their work in the federal government. So given all that's been asked about as well, what concrete measures would you also put in place to ensure that there is clear independence between DOI, every agency, including City Hall as well?
I think the key is investigative independence, that we are not, DOI is not providing details or specifics about ongoing investigations to anyone. In certain contexts, there are things like grand jury secrecy laws that legally prevent any such information sharing from occurring, but that as a general matter should go beyond just those types of investigations and grand jury concerns. I think you ensure independence of investigations by having confidentiality. It protects the investigation and it protects independent decision making.
I think to your point too, and as you mentioned as well, the preserving that independence becomes so important. I'm sure you can agree, given the last 4 years as well, the incredible work that DOI did too, which resulted in the federal cases that came forward as well, just speaks to how important it is to have that independence. And so your consideration and thought to and testimony in support of preserving the independence of that office too is critical, I think, and highlights one of the main roles that DOI needs to ensure it plays as it moves forward in city government. Another question I have as well is you heard from Councilmember Banks a bit about, with respect to Nycc, the way in which DOI can play a role in continuing both building on the federal consent decree, but also work separate and apart from that too. How do you take that lens to fighting corruption and conflicts of interest across all city agencies? How would you ensure proactively that DOI is fulfilling its mandate to root out waste and, frankly, corruption and conflicts of interest at all city agencies in addition to Nycc?
Yeah, I think it's very important that DOI is looking at ways to find kind of the systemic risks in various areas and agencies. I think part of that can be gleaned from past investigations that DOI has done. So making sure not just being focused on particular findings in a particular investigation, but then stepping back and taking a broader view to see what broader lessons can be learned that can apply not just to that agency, but to other agencies as well. And potentially issuing a formal report about that and publicizing it, and obviously engaging with agency heads to ensure that they are not just aware of DOI's findings, but implementing them and implementing recommendations, and also being proactively engaged in understanding why certain recommendations have not been implemented, and then seeing if there's workarounds to that. Sometimes it may be funding issues, but sometimes it may be the practicality of the recommendation. And if that's the issue, then I think DOI should be proactively trying to address that, because the goal here is prevention as much as possible. That is better for everybody involved, including the taxpayers. And so I think it's important to look at ways we can do that. It may involve data analytics. One of the things I'm interested in doing when I get there is understanding what DOI is already doing in that regard, and seeing how that can be enhanced.
I think prevention is a key point as well. I mean, we've seen from the last, 4 years too, across city agencies, it's a lot, as you know well too, it's a lot of work after the fact to correct and issue corrective action plans and ensure that whether it's violations of sanctuary laws that have happened, that after the fact we are trying to remedy, and we had a hearing about that earlier this year in the Oversight Committee, we all benefit from having preventative measures in place and protections to ensure that violations of the law by agencies or corruption is not ongoing. And so I think the more that DOI can take that role, the better it is for the efficiency of government overall too. Finally, in the past, advocates have requested that community input be taken into consideration when appointing inspectors general, particularly the NYPD inspector general. Are you open to such input? How would you solicit, if you are open to that input, public participation in the selection process here?
I am open to that input. I think I would need to understand how that input in the past has been received before kind of expounding on exactly what that might look like. But as a general matter, I think the Office of the Inspector General for the NYPD should have relationships with key stakeholders, including advocates in that area, and that includes receiving input regarding who or what qualifications would be ideal for a person in that position.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And seeing no other members have questions, Ms. Shihara, you are excused.
Thank you.
I now open up the floor to public for comments. We ask that you please limit your comments to 2 minutes. If you wish to speak, please fill out an appearance card with the Sergeant of Arms. You'll be given an opportunity to make your comments. Also, if you have a written statement, please provide a copy to the statement to the Sergeant of Arms. I first call Ms. Maria Cruz Melendez and Ms. Kristen Mace.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Maria Cruz Melendez, and I am a partner at the law firm Skadden Arps in New York City. Prior to that, I served for over a decade as an assistant United States attorney for the Eastern District of New York, where, among other things, I served as deputy chief of the Public Integrity Section and deputy chiefs of the Civil Rights Section. I greatly appreciate the opportunity to speak before you today in strong support of the nomination of Nadia Shahada to serve as Commissioner of the Department of Investigation. During the entirety of my tenure at the EDNY, I had the pleasure of working alongside Nadia, and I know her to be an attorney of exceptional integrity and judgment with a true dedication to public service. At EDNY, we worked together on various matters, including as trial partners, and I saw firsthand her skills as an investigator and advocate, as well as her abilities managing complex, high-stakes matters with rigor and fairness. As you're aware, Nadia held multiple leadership roles at EDNY involving organized crime, corruption, and civil rights. And in each of her positions, she demonstrated not only legal expertise, but also a strong moral compass and a commitment to doing what is right. She also earned the respect of her peers, direct reports, and law enforcement partners due to her professionalism and approach to leadership. Nadia works tirelessly, approaching every case with care and precision, and she's deeply committed to achieving justice for victims, while at the same time bringing compassion and sound judgment to her work, attributes that are essential for leading an agency charged with maintaining accountability and public trust. Having myself investigated and prosecuted cases together with DOI, I recognize that it is an agency which requires independence, integrity, and unwavering commitment to the rule of law. Nadia embodies all of these qualities. I'm confident that if confirmed, she will serve with distinction and uphold the highest standards of this office. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Kristen Mace, and I'm currently a partner at the law firm of Covington and Burling. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak today. It is my honor to offer my unequivocal support for the nomination of Nadia Shahada for Commissioner of the New York City Department of Investigation. I previously served alongside Nadia Shahada in the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of New York. Nadia and I joined the U.S. Attorney's Office in the same year, I believe it was 2011, and I had the honor of working with Nadia for more than a decade. During the latter part of that period, I served as Chief of the Criminal Division for the U.S. Attorney's Office and was responsible for supervision of all of the criminal investigations and prosecutions of the office, including Nadia's work in the areas of public corruption, anti-corruption, and combating the victimization of vulnerable individuals and communities. Nadia's exacting preparation, tireless dedication, fearless perseverance, and fairness made her the model of what every citizen would want from a prosecutor and a public servant. She made tough cases and refused to be intimidated or deterred from the mission. But she also approached every individual, victim, witness, target, or criminal defendant with the utmost independence, professionalism, and she has always treated everyone with dignity and fairness. Even as Chief of the Criminal Division, I often sought out Nadia's counsel and advice. She's an exceptional strategic thinker and an accomplished advocate, but more importantly, she was never distracted from the goal by any type of influence or bias. I appreciated Nadia's counsel so much because she is an independent thinker who stays clear-eyed about the mission, with a focus on the best way to reach a just result and make New York City safer and fairer for all. I have never seen Nadia express or act from bias. I have always known her to make independent decisions based on the facts and the law alone. As a lawyer, and more importantly, as a citizen of New York City, I'm delighted, may I just finish? Thank you. I'm delighted to know that if confirmed, Nadia Shahada will be in a position to hold our public officials to the highest ethical standards, and that if anyone strays from his or her duty, she will fight to address the problem and ensure a just and result and recommend necessary improvements. I am confident that Nadia Shahada will be one of the most effective commissioners New York City has ever had. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. Seeing no other members of the public sign up to speak, this public hearing is now closed. I would like to thank the candidates, the member of the committee staff, the sergeant-at-arms, and the member of the public for their participation in today's meeting. This meeting of the Committee of Rules, Privileges, Elections, Standards, and Ethics is now adjourned.